So the estuary is a place that all salmon from all the different parts of the Skeena watershed have to pass through on their way to sea. So anything that affects salmon in this area has the potential to affect salmon from throughout the watershed.
The estuary supports the highest abundances of fish, but then also a very high diversity of populations that are locally adapted from throughout the watershed.
Salmon, right when they enter the ocean, it's like a super stressful time for them. They're transitioning from freshwater to saltwater, and that's where they have the highest rate of mortality in their whole life.
And that is where a growing body of science has shown a lot of the dynamics of salmon are controlled.
I think that's part of the reason why we're doing this project, is to see what sort of impacts these developments would have both on salmon populations and individuals that rely on those populations for food fisheries all throughout the Skeena watershed, because all the salmon are coming right into this area, and it seems to be a very critical habitat for juvenile salmon that are out migrating. So any sort of large-scale development that'll disrupt that habitat, it's a huge gamble.
The problem is that we have a lot of industrial developments being proposed right in and around Flora Bank, Lulu Island, Inverness Passage, and Porpoise Channel. These developments clearly have a significant likelihood of causing serious impacts to juvenile salmon that are out migrating from the Skeena River.
For these fish, one of the interesting things we did is we collected little fin clips of them and sent them off to the GFO stock assignment laboratory, and they can use that genetics to figure out where those fish were coming from. And so the smolts are swimming downstream from this vast watershed, and we caught them at this base of this vast watershed, and then we could figure out, well, where are they actually from? And what we found is that the fish that we collected in the estuary were linked to dozens of populations from throughout the Skeena watershed and beyond.
So we've got a sockeye from Babine Lake. It has a tag on it, so that identifies it, and it has two different colors, so we'll be able to contact them, and they'll let us know what day that went through the fence, and we'll be able to see how many days for it to come down the river. So usually it takes about a week to 10 days, but it's hard to know how long it's been in the ocean.
And the question I was asking myself is, what is the magnitude of this type of impact?
So we're up here in the Skeena, I think, to get a general idea of what the fish do when they leave the river, a sense of where they go, and as well as how long they're in the river.
So the project started off as a small-scale effort to look at early marine survival of different species of salmon.
And the questions we're trying to answer here, and Charmaine is leading this charge, is to basically go out and with beach seines and purse seines and trawls, figure out, well, where are the salmon? Let's compare different areas. Let's figure out how does this area that's proposed for development, right where the north arm of the Skeena enters the ocean, how do the abundances of salmon there compare to other places in the estuary? And so what we found, perhaps isn't surprising, in all the different locations, we compared different regions, but we found all species in all locations. It turns out that salmon use the Skeena River estuary. That shouldn't be surprising. Second largest salmon producing watershed in Canada. It turns out there's salmon there. Surprise, surprise.
And so we were wondering whether the different species were evenly distributed around the estuary. And we found that that's not the case, that the highest abundances of some species are in the inside northern waters, closest to the mouth of the northern exit of the Skeena. Which means that, and that's also where all the proposed industrial development is as well. So not only is the development proposed for the Skeena estuary, but it's proposed for the part of the Skeena estuary that the most salmon are known to inhabit.
Flora Bank, which was an area which we've known for years, like since the 70s, it's been told to us that Flora Banks is a really important juvenile salmon habitat. And it's good for two main reasons. Firstly, it has all the right habitat qualities, all the right conditions. But secondly, it's right in the pathway of all of those out-migrating salmon. So there's 279 salmon that really need that kind of habitat. There it is. It's the first thing they hit.
And so in the traditional sort of environmental assessment office or the EA proposals, what you usually have is you have a project assessing the potential project effects. You then have that project proposing to mitigate for those effects. And to this point, invariably, that'll sum to zero residual project effects. And so I just wanted to step back and examine this assumption that mitigation works, that there can be sort of no net loss of habitat through the creation of other habitat. So I did a literature review on this, and turns out that DFO did an audit of habitat compensation plans, and what they found is that the majority, 2/3 of projects, actually didn't create as much habitat as they needed to. And so some projects destroyed more than they were supposed to, some projects created less than they were supposed to, but the end result is that 2/3 of projects led to net loss of habitat.
Because we can't move Flora Bank. No matter what else goes in there, we can't move it. The salmon aren't going to find it if we put it on the other side of Banks Island or something.
Secondly, the data on this is mixed in terms of how good the coverage is, but the link between creative habitat and the desired biological outcome, whether it's productivity or diversity, this is not very supported by the scientific literature at all. It turns out if you create habitat, only rarely does it actually lead to the desired biological response. We have habitat mitigation, usually not creating habitat that works, and then that habitat usually doesn't biologically function, and that costs billions of dollars per year.
Seems like that shoreline has a perfect mixture of the nutrients from the river and the salt water mixing. So there's tons of smelt and herring, and the smelt seem to be a huge food source for like the baby springs and coho. So tons of feeding behavior on that. And then Flora's Bank seemed to just be the perfect spot for smelt. I guess maybe they spawn in the sand there. They do require sand to spawn. So there was a lot around the fish around the edges of Flora's Bank and Porpoise Channel. So it seemed to be good feeding grounds.
And so it turns out that what happens in that first phase of that sort of early marine entry period, that seems like it controls the number of fish that return to the next generation. And this is, of course, important for two reasons. The number of fish determines the sort of trajectory of that population, whether it's going up or going down. It also determines how many fish we can catch and eat.
Well, they all like areas with points, current, and lots of food. So in this case, you got the Skeena River, and it seems to come out and turn north and mix with the salt water. Just you get that perfect combination that grows a ton of plankton, and then everything else feeds on that. And really rich all the way up as far as we went. Like Big Bay was still mixed with a lot of Skeena water.
And together, what I think this data is starting to show us is this area that's proposed for development that has these multiple projects getting put forward. It's a really critical habitat for many of these species, and these species support the cultures and economy of this area.
So there's the dredging, and so that's like directly going to affect habitat by removing it.
And it has the potential to really destabilize and change Flora Bank in this community. And this is graded as one of the most critical salmon habitats in the Skeena Estuary, and this eelgrass habitat is particularly vulnerable and limited. So this picture here is the reddish brown here is the outflow, all the contaminated sediment from the Prince Rupert pulp mill. So this is the dioxins and the furans that Jonathan mentioned, PAHs, other chemicals that were disposed of from the Prince Rupert pulp mill for over I think 60 years, settled here. And this material is right where, or this sediment plume from the pulp mill of contaminated materials is right where all the dredging is going to take place, or most of it. And so a big concern is re-dredging out these materials, which are currently, like Jonathan showed, a lot of them are underneath the surface of the sediments. They're buried several inches or half a foot down. And once you dredge them up, you expose all those contaminants to all the organisms living there.
So prediction, just finally, just to finalize it off, basically of the 32 kilometers, give or take, shoreline, 18 kilometers, or about 57% will be impacted by these projects, and about 29% of habitat loss. What does that mean? It might be a big enough loss to talk about one of those tipping points.
This is from a DFO study from 1973. Basically says floor bank is the most critical salmon habitat in Skeena. At the time there was a big port development proposed there, and they concluded at that time that it was basically unacceptable, have impacts on the fishing industries, and it shouldn't be developed there. It should actually be put somewhere else. We've known this for over 40 years. Why would we then go and zone this industrial land and ask LNG proponents to site their facilities there? How does that make any sense? And we really have to, I think, in my opinion, develop an estuary management plan for the Skeena. And this needs to be informed by the best available science. I think we have a lot of that, and we're gathering a lot of that, but we could obviously do more work. And it needs to be co-designed by First Nations and local communities. And one of the most important things is they need to have legislated goals, objectives, and orders within the plan.
It's hard for me to imagine a North Coast where salmon isn't one of the most important parts of the economy. It's just so ingrained here.
It seems we come from the south coast, and like springs and chinooks when we're sampling are like super rare, and the sockeye we get, Fraser River sockeye. I think up here you guys have so many different kinds of fish and such a strong river still with all the different species and locations, so work hard to keep them. Don't lose them. It's hard to get them back once they're gone.